Okay. Yes. Welcome, everybody, to the third speaker of the day, Bernhard. He is the CEO of Blocktrade, and he will be joining us today to talk about the Blocktrade's perspective on the tokenization market and on why regulations is not a problem. So maybe a little bit controversial. Please take the stage, Bernhard, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you and hi. So first I will try to see if my engineering degree paid off in some way, and I will try to share my screen here.
Okay, we're crossing our fingers. Please
doing my best here. Yeah. And also, so you know, I will be monitoring the chat, so in case something does not work, just let me know. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So when I saw the timeline for today's event, I saw that two exchanges were talking about pretty much the same topic, or at least a similar topic as I'm going to talk about. So I figured I might be trying to do something a bit different. So what I'm doing here is, first I'm talking about some basic concepts that probably most of you know, but maybe some of you don't. So let's give it a try. And I'm having one message that I want to bring across here, which I will talk about a bit more towards the end. But first, you should know a couple of things about me. Number one is COVID made me change my hairstyle a bit. So that's actually me on the picture right here. And the other things is, Tim said something quite interesting before. So I've been in the blockchain industry for about 7 years now. So actually when the DAO happened, I'm not sure if that's something that some of you know, but the DAO was quite a big thing a couple of years ago. And that's roughly when I came into the blockchain industry. So judging by what Tim said before, that makes me a dinosaur. I've never been named that, but it's a first for me and it's quite interesting. And I'll take it as a compliment to be a dinosaur in that industry. And what that also means is I have seen my fair share of things that I wouldn't have liked to see in this industry in the past 7 years. That ranges for quite some things, from frauds over things that just didn't work out as they should. And I've made some experiences in that industry. And this is essentially what made me take the challenge of building Blocktrade as the CEO. And on my journey in the past 7 years, or actually starting back in 2012, I've built some companies, some in the blockchain industry, some not in the blockchain industry. And one other noteworthy company, or actually association, that I would like to name here is the Digital Asset Association Austria. And with that association that I am a board member of, we are actually trying to advise regulators and advise any kind of stakeholders in the blockchain industry and digital asset industry on how to drive regulation, on how to set up regulation, and how to make the market more accessible to anyone. So that's a couple of words about me. And instead of telling you about what Blocktrade is so far, which is essentially a pretty decent cryptocurrency exchange, I would like to tell you a bit about what Blocktrade's vision is. And when we are building Blocktrade, we are having one big thing in mind. And that stems from the 7 years of experience that I have had in my past in the years that I've been working in this industry. And in these years, I have seen that people do not really understand what they're working with to a large extent. I'm sure all of you here do know what I'm talking about. But those are the people that are actually trying to get themselves educated. However, there's a large majority out there that does not do that. And so we have a lot of people that still do not know how this market actually works, how exchanges actually work. And products are getting more and more complicated. And we can see that right now, starting with crypto indices that are being published, or suddenly cryptocurrency exchanges acting as kind of a broker. And so what we are trying to do here at Blocktrade is we want to boost knowledge. And we want to do that as an extensive way. So essentially what Blocktrade is going to be is kind of a knowledge base completely incorporated into the other things that Blocktrade is going to be. And that is essentially the main point, because we think accessibility to these markets that we are opening up to a broad audience is what it's all about. And with that in mind, when we think normal currencies, fiat currencies, euro, US dollar, we are not thinking about exchanges right away. So the other thing that we have in our vision is that we are going to have to drive use cases in order to also drive mass adoption of any kind of assets that we're talking about here, be it cryptocurrencies or be it securitized assets or any other kind of asset. We have to build use cases around this, not just the exchanges, not just the secondary markets. And something that we are already quite proud of and that we're still driving is we are a crowd-owned exchange. So what we have actually done is we have given out equity to smaller investors. We are not owned by one big corporate, but actually we have investors that are essentially our B2C customers that can decide where Blocktrade is going and what Blocktrade is doing. And that is something that differentiates us quite a bit, because that means that inherently we are always acting in the investors and in our owners and therefore in our customers' favor. So that about Blocktrade. Now I would like to talk about the actual topic of the summit and also this presentation here, and that is the state of the market. And for at least 5 years, I have seen the same headline over and over and over. And that is Europe awaits. Europe awaits implementation of regulatory framework. Europe awaits new legislation. Europe awaits regulators to give their opinion on whatever. We have seen that for years now. And we have seen also some regulators tightening down on those assets. In this headline is German and US regulators, but yesterday we have seen the effect that China can have on the market when they're saying we are trying once again, as we have seen in 2017, to prohibit cryptocurrencies. And just as a side note here, I would like to say a couple of sentences about my understanding of what is currently going on, because we have seen the exact same thing, and I'm sure that a lot of others have experienced that as well here in this room, in this session. When we're having currencies and a technology that is essentially being owned by everyone, decentralized, and not being regulated by one single party, then I think it's not a bearish sign if a company if a country, a government that is trying to have a very tight grasp on their monetary policy is trying to prohibit that. The opposite is the case, in my opinion. Actually, what is happening here is this is getting so much traction that it is becoming a danger to some parties that might have or might want to have a very tight grip on their monetary policy. But that much, just a couple of words on my opinion on what is going on here. And something else, and I will talk about that a bit more in a second, is exchanges are trying to get some kind of licenses and some kind of regulation so that they can proceed with their businesses in certain ways. And this is in most cases good, but in some cases it is also a mistake in my opinion, which I will also talk about in a second. So another topic that we have to clear up front is, why do we actually need securities exchanges? And I'm pretty sure that everybody that is in here does already know why we need securities exchanges. Still, I would like to give you a couple of words about my opinion on why we need to do this. So we've heard about that, and Simon said that in the presentation before me. We need securities exchanges so we can allow people to access new markets. And one big thing that always comes to my mind here is the real estate market. And that's, of course, the number one market that not necessarily the number one market, but a very important market that everybody is talking about when we're talking about security tokens, the real estate market. And looking at the real estate market, what we can see is it's very hard to get into, because for most people, compared to, for example, buying a loaf of bread, that is a very high investment, a very large investment. And so it's not just something that you just do because it's that large of a sum of money. And even if you are able to do it, which means that you're among the lucky few percent of people, then probably you would still think about getting a loan for that because you don't want to risk as much of your equity, or maybe you cannot even afford that much equity right away. So these markets, and it's not just a real estate market, that's just a very good example of it. There's a lot of more markets. But these markets are very hard to access for a lot of people. And this is something that securities exchanges can change. And there's two means that they can change that with. The first one is by providing liquidity. So liquidity is also one of the keywords that we are hearing quite a bit. But what does liquidity mean? When we're looking, and just to stay with that example, the real estate market, when we're looking at the real estate market, what we're seeing is that it takes quite a while to actually move assets around on that market. So just think of the last time you bought Bitcoin or any other kind of cryptocurrency. When we just talk through the whole process, what that means is you sign up on an exchange, you may have to go through the KYC procedure. Then you have to understand the pairs that are listed there. Then you have to put in your order. And once you have done that, essentially you have your asset immediately within a couple of seconds or even less on liquid markets. And so that is essentially what liquidity is. Because if you compare it to real estate, then what that means is you have to list your real estate object with an agent or on independent marketplaces. It will probably take weeks until you have done all the required documentation. Will take weeks until you have enough customers that are even interested. And so those markets are not very liquid. However, by the fragmentation that we can do by the securitization of such assets, we can actually provide much more liquidity, because we are, and that is the next point here, we are eliminating hurdles. Not only hurdles in terms of the liquidity that is required or the financial means that are required to access those markets, but we are also eliminating hurdles in terms of bureaucratic effort that you have to do to take part in such markets. And the fourth point here, and that is especially in a market that is dominated by Elon Musk, apparently must not be underestimated, is that securitization is a very hot topic. So for at least, I'd say 4 or 5 years, it has been a topic where everybody was saying, we are going to list securities on the exchange. We are going to have a secondary market for that. So far, it has not happened in a significant way. And it is quite a hot topic. And we see just by the interest here, we see by the interest in this tokenization summit here, but also by the media and how much they're writing about this whenever any news come out of this, how much interest in this market we have currently ongoing. And so that is something that we also should keep in mind when we talk about the need for these securities exchanges. So next, we should ask ourselves the question if exchanges are lying to us. And you may ask yourself, okay, why is he asking that question? But I'll give you the answer up front. And the spoiler for this answer is, yes, they are lying, and no, they are not lying. And there's a couple of things where I feel there is quite a bit of a lack of understanding. And that lack of understanding stems from, again, what I mentioned before, a lack of education. So what we're seeing is that not only people, but also in some cases, companies and exchanges say license is a license, and they don't make a differentiation. And something where this is becoming very apparent is the so-called VASP, or Virtual Asset Service Provider registration, which, as the name says, is a registration and not a license. And in some countries, this is called a license, although it still has a registration character. And what we're seeing there is that some exchanges go out there and say, we have a license, and even claiming that it is a license and that they are now strictly regulated by a regulator, thus pretending that they are more secure or more proficient than other exchanges that would not have such a license, and using that as a marketing instrument. On the other hand, a lot of exchanges also claim that an MTF is the solution to everything. I can't tell you how often I've heard over the past years exchanges saying, hey, we're going to get an MTF, which, by the way, stands for Multilateral Trading Facility license. And then we're going to list securities, which is plainly not how it works. MTF licenses have their use case, and there are very good use cases even for cryptocurrency exchanges, which we can see in the headline that I've shown before, which is Crypto Facilities, which is, I think, a subsidiary of Kraken. And they have received an MTF license in the UK. And the reason for them to get this MTF license is a great one, because what they have done is they have looked at the market and decided that actually there's quite some interest from institutional investors in the assets that they are offering. But institutional investors do have a guideline very often that prohibits them from essentially making business with non-regulated or non-licensed businesses. And so what they did is they made essentially, or they tried to get and got in the end the MTF license, which allowed them to say, we actually are licensed, we are regulated by the UK regulator, and thus we can do business with institutional investors. So very good use case for an MTF license. On the other hand, and I've intentionally blacked out the name here, and I've intentionally blacked out even the country that was involved here. On the other hand, we have here an exchange that got a VASP registration that I mentioned before in a country that did not even call it a license. They called it a registration. And what we have to be aware of is a registration is not something that you do accidentally. It's not something that just happens to be there suddenly. Because although it's far from the efforts that you would have to put into obtaining a license, it is quite a bit of effort to fill out the forms. And in that form, it says, I don't know, at least 50 times registration. So when you get such a registration, you know it is a registration and not a license. And still, there are some players on the market there that go out and say, we have been granted a crypto license, which is plainly wrong. And what they are doing is they're lying into the faces of their customers. They're lying into the faces of the media. And this is one of the reasons why, unfortunately and unjustified, cryptocurrencies and the whole DLT market still has quite a shady reputation all over the world. And it shouldn't have, but players like this are the reason why this is happening, or one of the reasons, let's say. So I think it's very important, again, not just to educate everybody on how securities work as such, but also educate them to understand how licenses work and what all these regulatory topics that we're talking about on a frequent matter are about. And so, yeah, that is essentially the part about exchanges. And when we're looking at regulation again, the EU is working on quite some interesting things. And I'm sure yesterday this has been touched quite a bit, but I'm still going to recap a bit on that. And there's two things that I would like to talk about specifically. And that is first the markets and crypto assets proposal that is currently being handled, or short MiCA, which is essentially the EU trying to provide clarity on how crypto assets should be treated on trading facilities and how stablecoins should be treated. Because this is one of the main problems that I've experienced also over the past years. When I'm talking to regulators, very often I get a reply, why do you even want regulation? It makes it harder. Be happy that there's some unclarity because it gives you more flexibility. But this is actually not how at least and I think there's the majority of the market has the same view on this as I do. When we're talking about regulation, clarity is always better than uncertainty. And we see that on the market. And just yesterday, we saw the perfect example for it. Although it's not entirely clear, at least from my understanding, what China is exactly going to do and how this will play out in practice, there is uncertainty on the market. And that immediately led to a lot of, a lot of drops in the prices on the market. And I think this is has not been the only factor yesterday, but certainly uncertainty plays a big role in that. And the second thing that the EU is currently, or the second thing that there is from the EU side is the DLT pilot regime, which is something that shows that actually the EU has a good understanding of the potential that we have with securitization and with cryptocurrencies and DLT technology in general. And essentially what the DLT pilot regime is the EU saying, we understand that this is a big thing, and we think we need to protect our customers because there's quite a lot of things going on that probably shouldn't go on this way, and I agree with them. However, what we do not want to happen is that we are essentially hindering innovation by making regulators act in a way that may be too strict. And so that is essentially what the DLT pilot regime is supposed to be. And so now to the actual message that I want to get across. And I've been hinting at this for pretty much all of the past 20 minutes. Do we need to wait for the regulators to finish this? Do we need to wait for us as exchanges to get licenses or to be able to do or create secondary markets for securitized assets before actually starting to work on those? And the clear answer to this is no, in my opinion, because what we are seeing, and I mentioned that before, a lot of people in this market have no understanding of what risk appetite is, let alone estimating their own risk appetite. And if we do not educate them on that before we actually provide the infrastructure for them to access those markets, what will happen is exactly what we've been seeing for quite a while now on cryptocurrency markets. People getting into those markets and wrongly estimating their risk appetite, playing around with instruments that they do not understand, and then essentially complaining and not understanding why they are losing money. And this is essentially what is going to happen if we make the entry hurdles too easy without educating people. We still have a lot of persons out there using exchanges without understanding how order books work or how order types work, who do not understand how limit orders, market orders work. which is essentially the basics of participating in such markets. And they also do not understand, and especially coming from traditional markets, they do not understand the risks inherent and specific to blockchain assets. And what I'm talking about here is, and maybe that speaks a bit against me as a CEO of a centralized blockchain exchange, I'm still living under the slogan, not your keys, not your crypto. And the problem here is that is true, that is very true, because the moment you have your assets on your own wallet, you're responsible for them. On the other hand, what happens is a lot of people do not understand how to operate those things and may lose their private key and then lose access to their assets. And while this might be a bit less of a problem if we're talking about securities, it still will be a problem. And I think it's a much worse sign if people are actually starting to lose securities or lose access to their securities, or are having to go through a lot of trouble in recovering those securities, if we are having this on an actual regulated market. And of course, an ongoing topic, and that is definitely not something that is new to anyone here, is securing accounts. I'm still seeing a lot of problems with people that do not use two-factor authentication or that reuse passwords, and that is throughout any platforms. And so that is something that we just have to educate people on. And lastly, and that's the most important point here, is people use the word securities a lot. And let's be honest, in the end, this is kind of a regulatory term that not everybody that will participate in those markets has an understanding of. Not all people know what securities are actually about. And we are talking about liquidity here. We are talking about opening up markets here to users that have not been able to access these markets before. But this, in my opinion, is not very useful if we're just getting over the people that have been participating in the traditional way we can access those markets already. So what we need to do is we need to get in new people. And the way we need to do this is, of course, by providing the right tools, by providing the regulatory setup that is required, by providing a good UI and UX. But before we can do all of that, and that is something where I think no player on the market has been putting in enough effort. We have to educate people on what is going to come and how they can use it and how they can benefit it. So essentially, the core message that I want to bring across to anyone that is watching here, and especially to all my colleagues from other exchanges, is we can educate people, and we can do that now, and so we should. So thank you, and I see we have some questions posted here, so I will look at those now. If Blocktrades still wants to launch an exchange, how do you plan to do this without an MTF license or similar? So what I'm saying is, and I'm not saying that an MTF license is the wrong way to go for listing securities. The thing that I'm saying is, currently the EU Commission is working on the MiCA proposal, and that is supposed to come out relatively soon in regulatory terms. And this will give a lot of clarification on how those securities or how secondary markets could be provided for such securities, for such assets. And this is essentially what I think is something that everybody is looking towards. And of course, there are ways to tokenize assets before. It's already happening, and there are already companies doing that. But what I think is the EU as a whole can get quite a competitive advantage as a market by now establishing proper regulation. And what we want to do at Blocktrade is we want to be part of that proper regulation from the EU side. And I've been working on that for, I'm not sure how long MiCA is in the review stage and how long we've been able to give feedback on that. I think for a year almost now. And we've been giving a lot of feedback. And what MiCA is turning out to be is looking quite good so far. So that is essentially what we are hoping for, to give quite a competitive advantage to the whole European market. So the next question is, do you see the fact that ETH miners can be located in OFAC jurisdictions potentially as a challenge for future regulatory discussions? If yes, how can this be solved? It can definitely be a challenge. However, my understanding is, and please don't take this as legal advice because I'm not the right person to answer this. But my view on this is that at this point, we're talking about a very decentralized system when it comes to Ethereum. Not for all blockchains, but specifically for Ethereum VR. So essentially, Ethereum as such, as a technology, as a platform, and as an ecosystem, cannot really be made responsible for how their single members act. And thus you can also not put Ethereum in one regulatory jurisdiction. You cannot put them, or essentially it is acting global. So yes, it can be seen as kind of a problem by some regulators. I think in the whole picture it will not necessarily be, because pretty much every regulator now is agreeing that at least at this stage, might not have been at the issuing of Ethereum, but at least at this stage, it is sufficiently decentralized to kind of come around this problem. The next problem is, how do you see a regulated exchange as Blocktrade integrating with the DeFi ecosystem? That's an excellent question. So I think what is happening here is we're seeing two different ways that users can interact with such systems. So I do like DeFi, I really do, and I'm a big fan of it. However, there are some massive disadvantages that we're seeing that might get solved over the next years, don't get me wrong, but right now they're existing. And the number one problem here is, have you tried going on Uniswap, for example, yesterday, and essentially doing anything? If you have, then I'm pretty sure you were not really happy with the fees. And that is essentially the scalability problem that we're seeing. And so what DeFi is doing in high demand times, like we have been seeing for, I'd say, at least 2-3 months now, is it's putting additional load on the whole system, making the whole thing more inefficient and more challenging. And that is on top of other problems that DeFi essentially has, which would be UI, UX topics. It would be regulation topics that, at least in some aspects, are quite uncertain. However, it is something that is quite interesting because we are, after all, talking about decentralized technology here. And so it is something that we are at Blocktrade also very much looking into. The next question is, I hope I didn't miss some questions here now. How do you see the tokenization possibilities, pro and cons for long-term fund management firms? Could they theoretically distribute their tokens on a regular digital exchange without relevant issues? That depends. So the only true answer here is it depends, because it really depends on where is the firm situated, what kind of assets are we talking about, what kind of digital asset exchanges are we talking about. So I cannot give one answer to that. In general, I would say yes, there is definitely the possibility, depending, of course, on the view of the regulators, depending on the capabilities of such exchanges, depending on the internal guidelines that such firms would have. But I think the possibility is definitely there. But yeah, unfortunately, it really depends on the details here. And I think the last question, because I think I'm over my time already, is, do you see a future for DeFi in Europe with MiCA? Seems a DAO is a difficult thing under MiCA. I wish I could answer this in a bit more detail, because what I can give a bit of a spoiler here is that we are working on something that will be quite interesting in terms of DAOs in general, because I have the firm belief that a system that is, I would say, very, very similar to a DAO is very much possible in the EU. It's very, very much possible within MiCA, and thus it will be very much possible to actually establish DeFi firms in a much more structured and much more clean way than we are currently able to do. But this is something that I think we will probably have a bit more news in the next couple of months. And so with that, I think I'll have to end my Q&A session and head back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernhard. Oh, you're getting a lot of claps. That's nice. Well, it's good that you have time for questions, because there was a lot of questions that came in the last 5 minutes. But very well.
And I appreciate it. It was quite some interesting questions. Thank you for that.
Yeah, somebody just raised their hand, but no, I think we are out of time, and I'm being told that the next speaker is ready. But this was very interesting. If people want to hear more or they have more questions, how do they contact you?
They can always contact me on social media. However, those are being quite flooded. So if it's about questions that are specifically directed towards Blocktrade, our vision and everything, first of all, feel free. I think there's the possibility to ask some questions in the panel discussion later on, which I will participate in. So feel free to ask questions there, and otherwise always feel free to contact our Blocktrade support, because they will also be happy to answer any questions, including questions about our vision, our roadmap, and also related to markets and market developments.
Okay, well, great answer there. We're getting more comments. Excellent presentation. Well done. I think you had people hanging on all the way through. That was good. Thank you so much, Bernhard. I will move on to the next speaker. See you later at the panel.
Yeah, see you later. Bye.